welcome to episode 206 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford,
Lydia Creed,
Nathan Smith.
And on today's episode, we will be talking about movies we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1976's Duelle. But first, we have a couple housekeeping notes. The first one, I'll link this to the Young Critics segment. We talked last week at the end of the episode when Andrew kind of Kanye Wested my Taylor Swift and jumped in and said we were going to be doing some 1980 movies.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And that we have come up, a lot of suggestions came in. We have come up with the two options for our English language 80s Young Critic movie. We're going to look at 1983's Risky Business. Tom Cruise. We're going to be talking about Tom Cruise in a little bit later, so let's talk about young Tom Cruise and kind of look back at his career in a sense. And our foreign language film is going to be 1986's The Green Ray. Feelings on that, guys? On both those movies?
The Green Ray is a masterpiece. That's good.
The other thing I wanted to look at, or that we were going to look at, is the latest comment that we received. This is in relation to our episode last week, Killer of Sheep. And this comes from Peter H. He says, I'm a clinical psychology doctoral student, and one thing I think is really interesting about Killer of Sheep is that it serves as an important reference point of the depiction of mental illness and by extension mental health care in black cinema. The complete lack of resources available to the main character is telling. Real-life black communities have often been exploited and mistreated by psychotherapists, so even when resources do become available, there is often a deep ambivalence to them. On the other hand, you get positive depictions as in Antoine Fisher, and on the other, you get the creepy manipulation shown in Get Out. This ambivalence to labels and treatments that were invented by white people is perfectly foreshadowed by Killer of Sheep. So Andrew and Nathan, as two people who were on the episode, what do you make of this comment by Peter?
I think that's just an incredibly smart comment, and I have nothing to add to it. It is perfect and amazing. Thank you for sending that to us.
Yeah, I was really struck by that comment when we got it, so thank you for that. Yeah, I think it goes deeper into something that we did talk about in detail last week, but we could have gone even further with. And so, yeah, that's all. It's always good to get that kind of really like positive, intelligent engagement. So, reminds you that the internet.
You shouted at people to engage with us at the end of last episode, so I think you got your wish.
I guess it worked. The internet is still a good place sometimes. So.
Yeah, no, I second this. We talked about it a little bit in the episode, but I felt like it could require its own whole section of kind of analyzing mental illness and mental health care in black cinema. And this, I thought, was one of the best examples. So thank you, Peter, for sending that in. But let's go ahead and jump into movies we saw this week. And Lydia, I'm going to start with you. You want to talk a little bit about 8th grade.
Not my 8th grade.
Not your 8th grade, but the movie 8th grade.
The movie 8th grade, which is Bo Burnham's directorial debut. Bo Burnham, I guess he got big on YouTube.
Yeah, he did.
He's our age, and he's a comedian. And
it blows my mind that he is the person who made this movie. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I feel like, I don't know. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. This movie is about, it takes place like the last week of 8th grade, and it follows a character named Kayla, and, you know, she's kind of getting excited for high school and feels weird and doesn't have a lot of friends, and, you know, just like typical 14-year-old teenage, just like insecurity, like right on the cusp of going into high school. And Burnham, I don't know, I think he really nails a lot of things that are both hyper specific about being a teenager now. I like the trailer has a lot of her looking at her phone, and she makes YouTube videos for fun. I guess he would know about that.
Her teachers and principals like trying to make hip jokes and
trying
failing.
To relate to the youths.
Dabbing and saying like, this lesson is gonna be lit.
That's a sex ed lesson, and it's just like, oh, as awful as that sounds. But also like pretty, I don't know, universal things. Like I recognize myself in Kayla, and that's 10 years, a decade now. Holy shit.
You're so old, Lydia.
I know. But I was really afraid that this would just be a really horrible experience to watch. Like I don't need to see someone living 8th grade on screen. I still remember it. But all the reviews have been saying it's like very empathetic and just like kind. It's a very kind movie because Kayla, as a 14-year-old, like, you can tell. I mean, the tragedy with Stanley, she's going to be fine. She's going to. God, if she could just get past like having a lot of acne and being a little bit insecure and like just being around other shitty 8th grade kids, like it'll be okay. Ultimately, spoilers, I guess. I don't know.
Spoilers for life.
Spoilers for life.
It's gonna be okay.
I think,
I wanted to ask one question, and I'm sure we'll get into it next week because I know it's going wide, and Andrew plans to have a review up on Monday on the site. But one of the things I'm wondering about is, it's rated R, which I think, I mean, does it make up for the R? Like, what's the barometer on that?
I mean, the rule for like language in films is like you get one fuck. I was gonna say F word, but I'm an adult. You get one.
This is an explicit podcast.
You get like one fuck, and then it becomes an R movie, or it's like kind of not explicit as in pervy or titillating, but kind of explicit conversations around sex. Because when you're 14 and like you're around a bunch of other 14-year-olds, co-ed, like that's when you start thinking about sex, and it comes up. So I think it earns it. I don't know if 14-year-olds would give a shit about this. Like, that's the thing. 14-year-olds can't get in to see it because it's an R-rated movie, but I also don't know how much they care. Like, maybe you need the 10 years to be able to look at it and be like, oh, good. Promise.
This is the thing. I haven't seen any reviews from 8th graders. All the people I've seen who like it are
24-year-olds.
Adults.
Like the guy who made it.
Yeah.
Well, do 8th graders know this movie exists? Is this just a marketing issue? Like, if this movie was being pushed the same level of, like, Love, Simon, would 8th graders know about and care about this movie?
And I also think Love, Simon, I don't know.
Do 8th graders know about Love, Simon?
Yeah.
Do they?
Okay, there's something to be said for, like, really positive, just, like, teenagers being just the fucking best. That's what Love, Simon is. Like, those are great teenagers.
Dude, I don't even know the last time I talked to somebody in middle school, so...
Like, those teenagers have their whole lives figured out, and like,
who knows what they're doing.
I mean, I'm using early high schoolers as a barometer for this. Right. High schoolers did know about Love, Simon. I have a hard time believing they know or care about 8th grade.
Well, do you think that's maybe because it's a theatrical release? Do you think if it was something on like Netflix, it would have gotten more attention from the 8th graders?
I mean,
do 8th graders care about Bo Burnham? Like, is he?
They don't care about that. But I feel like if you had a movie called 8th Grade on Netflix,
this is such an out of touch conversation of like, what do 8th graders?
Do 8th graders even watch Netflix? Do 8th graders watch?
100%.
Okay, so I know that
we don't know.
High school.
Somebody find an 8th grader and bring them on the show, please.
I know that Netflix content about high schoolers and middle schoolers tends to do very, very, very well. Like 13 Reasons Why was a huge fucking deal. Fucking Riverdale is a huge deal.
Riverdale's good.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that if this was maybe available on streaming platforms, that would cut out the middleman of like them not being allowed to see it legally, and they would just watch it anyway because they're watching whatever, behind their parents' backs already.
Right.
You want to know a fun fact about this movie?
Sure.
Somebody I was in a class with last semester was in this movie as like one of the 8th graders.
And how old is this person?
I think it was like a mixed grad and undergrad class, so there were undergrads in there. I think like 19 or 20. It was very weird when I saw the trailer for this movie.
The movie?
I don't even know. I do not know. I just saw this trailer and recognized someone in it, and I was like, that's very weird.
They might have played a high schooler, because one of the things Kayla does is like goes and shadows a high schooler for a day. Like, oh, this is what high school is like. And those high schoolers, great high schoolers. Again, way better
high schoolers
than
scare me.
Real high schoolers. Holy shit. I don't know. There's just so much more put together, I think. So I don't know. Because they grew up with like YouTube tutorials and shit. one of the first things Kayla does is like following a just everyday makeup look, just practicing it. And I was like, oh.
Is there any slime in this movie?
That's why they're all better than I was. No.
No slime videos? That's the thing I know that kids like, the slime videos.
That's right.
And the
They
Lil
do
Pump.
love those.
That's it, you know. That's all I know about teenagers.
There are Rick and Morty references.
Oof.
I know that somebody asked Bo Burnham why he made this movie with a female protagonist rather than try and reflect something.
I'm so glad he did.
He said
Holy
that
shit.
if he would have made this with a male protagonist, it just all would have been about Minecraft videos, and so he decided not to.
There's a character that Kayla meets who seems like maybe who Bo might have been in 8th grade. Just like, just go see it.
I can't wait. Yeah,
It's worth it.
seen it. Opening night.
Well, 8th grade is in theaters now, so you can check it out and see if it's Gucci or not.
Ooh, what the hell, Zach?
Lost all our 8th
So
grade
painful.
listeners.
I'm so
Every
sorry,
time
8th
she
graders.
does that.
The next movie is the big release that came out this past week, and it is Mission Impossible Fallout. We could sit there and talk about the synopsis, but it's a Mission Impossible movie. So Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, has an impossible mission. He teams up with some people, and they race against time to finish it.
Turns out it's possible.
Yeah, it's a
Silly
lot of spy shit. This one stars Staples, Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg. Yeah, and it brings back Rebecca Ferguson and Alec Baldwin from the last one. And then it adds Angela Bassett, Vanessa Kirby, and Henry Cavill in this one. This is for the first time. And his mustache.
And his mustache.
Oh, and Michelle Monaghan comes back
And
as
his
well.
arms.
Is contractually obligated.
So
Wait, can I just ask how integral is this mustache
It's not,
to
but
the
it's
plot
great.
of this movie?
like I just see Justice League simmering away.
Why was this a huge deal?
It's just a huge show because I think the mustache is from when he was Superman, and
No.
I
The
mean,
mustache was when he
joke.
was doing this movie.
They made him. They digitally erased his mustache for
Yes.
reshoots on Justice League.
Yeah,
because
okay,
he had
that's
to
what I was
shoot this
talking about.
movie.
No, but yeah.
It's not that important. I don't know.
Okay, but can I ask you really quick? How does his mustache compare to Aaron Eckhart's mustache in the movie Sully?
It's pretty. It's up there. It would be more
Which one would
like
you choose?
Tom Hanks's mustache in Sully. Yeah,
Okay.
but like dark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Lydia wrote a review about this for the site, and I kind of want to go through a couple beat points that you make about the movie, and we can kind of shape the conversation on that. So the first one,
Okay.
and really the fiery one that you were coming out with about a week in advance, was a lot of critics were comparing this. A lot of critics were comparing this to
so
Mad Max
mad.
Fury Road, and you make a good point that it's less about
Why would
like
you
this
do that?
movie kind of being the same, and it's more of a lazy comparison that critics make. I think in terms of trying to explain it to the viewing public, going, it's like this, it's the best movie since this, to kind of give a reference point, which kind of invalidates a lot of, or it just takes away a lot of the conversation and the actual criticism and evaluation of the action in this movie. But Lydia, what struck you about that comparison in linking to Fallout?
I mean, my main thing is why would you compare your movie to a better movie? And because you're not doing yourself any favors. And also, like you said, it's very lazy because it's just like, oh, what's the most recent action movie that did well? Not all action movies are created equal. And like,
That's in the Bible.
what John Wick or Fury Road does is different than what Mission Impossible does. Like I said, there's a lot of silly spy shit, and that comes with like talking and just espionage plot stuff. I don't know. I didn't care. And what I love so much
We
about
talked about this via text was a lot of talking. And I think we talked a lot about how like Fury Road, and you talked about it in the piece, uses visuals to convey narrative information and give
Storytelling, yeah.
and tell the story.
And just,
While
like-
I don't feel that in Fallout at all. It feels much like the other Mission Impossible movies, which are these crazy, very fun but extravagant stunts, but it's not moving in parallel with the narrative. It's kind of stopping the narrative at a halt and doing this thing and then returning to the narrative.
Then they should make
it's a different genre. It's a spy movie. It's not it's a spy movie, you know?
Yeah, ooh, yeah.
You're right. There should be more historicity, you know?
But I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think that a movie a couple years ago that did a similar thing was Skyfall, the James Bond movie, and I feel like that's a movie that was able to carry some narrative beats through the action. I don't think that it matters necessarily what subgenre of action it needs to be. I think that the thing that really needs to drive action is having this really visceral, extravagant stunt, but also being able to also carry some story beats and narrative. It doesn't have to be a complex narrative, but it at least needs to get you kind of involved with the characters.
Yes.
Yeah.
It needs to be motivated. Like, I need a reason. Well, I guess I don't need a reason. A lot of people don't need reasons. But for me, I would like a reason to care about the action that's happening in this extravagant set piece, because, I don't know, some like character information or arcs are actually happening at the same time, as opposed to just...
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of just inherent to the Mission Impossible franchise also, in how Tom Cruise plays Ethan Hunt, and they kind of make fun of it a little bit in this one, but a lot of his stunts, especially with the last 3 movies, is you kind of have the stunt happening and you have like Simon Pegg or something going, what is he doing? And then you have, just let Ethan be Ethan, and then he does the crazy stunt, and it's cool because you do have that connection that he is actually performing this. And I think that people kind of roll their eyes at that, but there is some, there should be some praise for that, because he's doing all of this stuff. He took, I forgot how many hours and days of training to be able to fly that helicopter. Like you can tell he breaks his ankle on a fall, because you can just see it crack. That's really cool, but at the same time, if you're doing that just to give a good little trailer tease and add something to the IMAX presentation, what's that really doing for the movie? I mean, you can probably just put that in 1080p and put it on YouTube and let people marvel at it that way. I don't think that it's necessary for a movie.
I don't know. Can I counter you guys, having not seen this movie? Is that okay? Am I allowed to do this? So for me, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about it being a distinct, I think sort of echoing your point, Lydia, about how not all action movies are created equal. It's not trying to do the same things Fury Road does. It shouldn't be compared to Fury Road. And for me, I think the spy subgenre is this distinct, separate subgenre, and doesn't really have a lot. I mean, it has certain features that are in common with other branches of action, but I think it's doing its own thing and comes from its own tradition. Like, I rewatched the first one last night, and that movie ends exactly where it begins, because that is, I mean, it's basically like, the thing is like, it's adapted from a TV show. It's basically a TV show that's just sort of cyclical, serial narrative where it starts over every time it ends. And I think that what he does with his body is sort of like the gadgets in the James Bond movie, where every James Bond movie you're like, oh, what's the new car, what's the new gadget, and it's sort of, the Mission Impossible movies are sort of doing the same thing, but like with the stunt, with his body, what's the new thing he's going to do, and it's just this sort of serial. I mean, for me, it's like the Mission Impossible movies are translating the narrative structure of television to film and are doing something different.
You're saying that's a good thing?
I think it's an interesting thing. I don't think it's. I think what's interesting about it is that
the academic's dilemma.
But at the same time, it's like it has that narrative structure, but without the like aesthetic trappings of television. That's what I like about it, because I like television narrative for its seriality and its repetition, and this is like, actually, I feel like critically reflecting on that. Since the spy's job, you get a new mission, in and out every day, doing the same thing, repeating, is like the best narrative package to express the feeling that Ethan Hunt's mindset, Anyways, sorry.
I don't disagree with you. I think that is a really good point. The thing I would somewhat counter it with, though, is that I think the biggest problem, and where most big problems in blockbusters come from, it comes from J.J. Abrams. And I think the problem is that J.J.
right.
Abrams introduced this whole personal connection with a wife and all this stuff in the third movie, and it seems like it's been the series has been kind of beholden to that up to this point. It's been like trying to keep those total lines, and I felt like it should have just kept the spirit of the first two movies, where Ethan Hunt is just kind of this blank slate action figure, hero character. Like, we don't really have to know too much about him, and I feel like these movies should they've incorporated great characters. I think Ving Rhames is fun. I think Simon Pegg is great. Rebecca Ferguson is fantastic. There are good side characters to this team, and it should incorporate more of the model of like Soderbergh's Ocean's trilogy, or one of those kind of problem-solving movies where you have it's more just centered about there's a mission and the team should have to figure it out, and it's less. There's no really outside narrative about how because I think that Fallout did have an interesting narrative point where it was trying to reckon with saving one rather than many, and I thought that was interesting. It wasn't completely fully explored, but I think it should be more about the team and less about Ethan Hunt as a person, because he's
about Tom Cruise as a person. That's the problem. Like, you mentioned all these other franchises, Fury Road or like James Bond or whatever. James Bond exists independent of who James Bond is, and like we just found out Max Ratanowski, I can't pronounce it. Whatever, doesn't matter who's playing him. That character, blank slate, exists to build the story around. But like Ethan Hunt is Tom Cruise.
Yeah, no, and that's true. I mean, it's like if you were gonna recast like Vin Diesel in Fast and Furious, like he's so connected to that character, it wouldn't make sense. And I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I just think that it should be about Tom Cruise and his team of people around him just doing stuff, and maybe that's gonna happen because the end of this movie kind of signaled that they're done with the wife thing, and it's gonna be more about just the team. But I don't know. I was just thinking back to Soderbergh's Ocean's movies and how at the end of the movie it's entertaining. They finish the heist, and at the end it's not like this whole we're the best of friends, let's hug and run off into the sunset. It's more of this collegial respect for each other, and they just kind of separate apart before the next one comes back. I think that Mission Impossible should kind of take a structure like that, where they can be friends and they immediately get along when the movie starts, but it's not like it has to be this big hugging family that's going to be like a ABC sitcom in the 90s. Like, I think there should be kind of a break apart and come back together element to that, and that would help the narrative be much more streamlined and focused. But yeah,
don't set yourself up for failure at the very beginning.
Lydia, I liked your review, though. And what the hell is Wolf Blitzer doing in this movie? That's another thing. That's just the problem with a lot of movies, though. What is Wolf Blitzer doing in this movie? Mission Impossible Fallout, it's in theaters now. Nathan, I'm going to cut it over to you. You wanted to talk about 35 Shots of Rum. Again, the movie, not like actually doing that.
No, this is not a repeat of episode 200.
Don't worry, guys. You can still listen.
So 35 Shots of Rum is a film by Claire Denis, the French filmmaker of movies like Beau Travail, White Material, and this year's Let the Sunshine In, and the upcoming High Life, which will be premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival later this year. This movie, I guess maybe first I should talk very briefly about my relationship with Claire Denis' work. I have had sort of varied responses to her movies. Beau Travail was the first one that I saw, and it's one of my favorite movies. It just is a very conceptually fascinating work to me, and it's like it's very sensory and sensorial and sensual and all those words. But it's also very, it has this just incredible structure to it as well. And her other films, I Let the Sunshine In, I wrote a somewhat negative review about for Cinematary this year. Her debut feature, Chocolat, I was a little cold on, and her film No Fear No Die from 1990, I was more positive towards when I saw it, but not over the moon about. But it is a movie that has stayed with me and that I've thought a lot about. So I am happy to report that 35 Shots of Rum, which I had been wanting to watch for a while but putting off a little bit until the time felt right, that this movie very immediately clicked for me. This is about this loose family in a suburb of Paris. Our main character is Lionel, played by Denis regular Alex Descas. He is a train conductor, and he lives with his college-age daughter, Josephine, who is studying anthropology. And it's not really explicitly addressed, but it's clear that Lionel has been a widower for a number of years, that Josephine's mother passed away a long time ago, and they've just fallen into this dynamic of this father and daughter of just supporting each other and really helping each other through life. And they have these loose, sort of familial, sort of not connections with other people in their apartment building, specifically Gabrielle, who we learn is a former lover of Lionel's, and sort of seems to have this weird, lingering obsession with him that he doesn't really reciprocate. She's a taxi driver, and there's also Noé, who is a sort of mysterious younger man who's Josephine's age, who appears very interested in her, but a little reluctant, and lives this sort of lonely existence. And you're immediately just dropped into this environment with these people, and relationships aren't really clear, but you start to figure them out through actions. What I really like about this is that a lot isn't really made literally explicit in that things are told to you. You have to sort of watch for signs and clues of relationships, and you have to sort of swim in them and figure out what these relationships are based on how they feel like and based on how people interact with one another. It also is, I'm for some reason always interested in movies about surrogate families and about people who have these very complicated, multifaceted relationships, which all these characters do. I mean, they fulfill multiple roles for one another. Josephine is Lionel's daughter, but she also does a lot of the housework and takes it upon herself to sort of fill this motherly role in their home life. Gabrielle is a sort of surrogate mother to Josephine, but at the same time, sort of a sister too, and obviously not a blood relative. Noé eventually, has these feelings for Josephine, sort of a son to Lionel, but also, very much an outsider to this dynamic. So you have people sort of going in and out of all these relationships, playing different roles, occupying different positions in regards to one another, and within that, Denis just creates this very emotional space for this dynamic that is, totally not this conventional family that we are often given in various media. This is a surrogate family, a family that's built, not a family that you're born into. And it's just becomes this very tender and human investigation of all of these people. And I was just extremely touched by it. I mean, there are these gorgeous opening sequence where Lionel and Josephine are both going home, and you see Lionel, he's conducting the train, and then he gets on the train to go home. And so you just see this incredible commute that these characters do to occupy a place in the world and to keep going and to be productive. There's a lot of, as always is the case with Denis, she sometimes has a sort of distance from her characters. You are very close to their faces. You are, in one sense, very intimate with them, but you oftentimes don't know what they're thinking. You just have their gestures and their movements and their actions to clue you in on who they are. And this movie, I felt like, is much more... the characters are much easier to get into than some of her other films, like Beau Travail, where people are just totally stripped down to their physicality. This is a little, I think, more obviously warm, maybe. There's an incredible sequence with the song Night Shift by the Commodores. This beautiful dance number. It's a deeply lyric and touching movie. And you will never look at a rice cooker the same way again after this movie. That's a little clue for you.
I don't know what to do with that clue.
It's I just really was like, I have not reacted this strongly to a movie in a while. I haven't cried at a movie in a while. This movie made me cry. Yeah, definitely. It's on Fandor. Definitely seek it out if you have a chance.
All right, we're going to take a short break. We will be back with Duelle as part of our Young Critics series after this.
Hi there, Cinematary listeners. This is your favorite Filipino podcaster, Jessica Carr, with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we surprisingly do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because apparently this will help increase our podcast exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at cinematary@yahoo.com so we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you can tell us where the money from Fargo is stashed, or maybe you don't think In the Mood for Love is the sexiest movie you've ever seen. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think really enjoy listening to us and participating in our film discussions. We also have some cool merchandise that you can check out on the site. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show.
We are back with part 2 of episode 206 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movie series with 1976's Duelle. Editor's note, I apologize, there are a lot of French names here, guys.
Okay.
Directed by Jacques Rivette, from a script by Rivette, Eduardo Di Gregorio, and Marilu Parolini. The film stars Juliette Berthaud as the Queen of the Night, who battles the Queen of the Sun, Boulay Ogier. Ogier.
Ogier.
This is some classic Zach content right here.
Ogier.
Gotta look this shit up, Zach. There are videos on YouTube.
Over a magical diamond that will allow the winner to remain on Earth, specifically modern-day Paris. The film is a part of a series titled Scenes from a Parallel Life, but was only one of 2 films completed for the series, the other being 1976's Noro, a pirate adventure. The proposed 3rd film, Histoire de Marie et Julien, stopped shooting after 2 days after Rivette suffered a nervous... Histoire.
Histoire.
Ah, s'il vous plaît? Suffered a normal...
Oh, no.
I apologize. After 2 days, it was stopped after 2 days after Rivette suffered a nervous breakdown and the entire project fell through. Some have cited Merry Go Round, much easier, in 1981 as having lingering parts of that 3rd movie. Duelle was only released in France, while Noro getting an early premiere in Germany, but never made it to France. Rivette cites Jean Cocteau. Is it Jean Cocteau or Jean Cocteau?
I think you know.
Just say
Cocteau.
Cocteau. As one of his many influences, saying in an interview for Sense of Cinema that he is someone who has made such a profound impression on me that there's no doubt he's influenced every one of my films. He's a great poet, a great novelist, maybe not a great playwright, although I really love one of his plays, The Knights of the Round Table, which is not well known. In 2016, Film Comment wrote specifically about Juliette Bertaux's performance in the film, saying Bertaux's performance channels and stylizes the composed tone that holds this universe together. Her character is not an extension of herself, as in La Chenoise in 1967, or even Rivette's own Celine and Julie Go Boating. In Duelle, her actions and reactions never fall into the categories of either the natural or the fresh. Spontaneity is too thin of an effect in the otherworldly battle this film presents. The peculiar manner in which she talks, moves through space and stares at people and things, fills the screen and beyond with an absolute belief in the new world she inhabits. Jonathan Rosenbaum in 1976 wrote about the film for the London Film Festival program, saying, like all the films in the projected series, it covers the carnival period between the last new moon of winter and the first full moon of spring, the only time when goddesses can appear on Earth and have commenced commerce with mortals. These goddesses are split between moon ghosts and sun fairies. In Duelle, we find a ghost and a fairy competing for possession of a diamond known as the fairy godmother, which can keep them on Earth past their allotted 40 days. With a non-extinct word, the female form of a masculine noun as title, and a imaginary muth as starting point, Duelle deliberately defines itself through contradictions and clashes, maintaining a perpetual disequilibrium of elements that equally flirts with and refuses the comforting balances of classic narrative. One can read it as yet another critique by Rivette of the film-going process itself, a situation which mortals, or viewers, take over the lives of goddesses or stars, and vice versa, though the term means of the transcendental diamond which fulfills every desire. In 1976, the New York Times said, the episodes and some of the speeches drift off at times into substantial obscurity. Although their general meaning is not hard to grasp, Rivette and his screenwriter Eduardo Di Gregorio have set out these two spirits with a deliberate prosaic harshness. There is nothing suggestive or elusive about them. Whew! Did we lose all the viewers or the listeners?
Only the French
All
ones.
our French listeners, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
All our French 8th graders are gone.
On that note, what did you guys make of Duelle? Lydia and Andrew, this was your first time seeing this movie?
Mm-hmm.
First time seeing it, and my first Rivette, so I really
Same, yeah.
know what to expect.
What did you guys think of the movie? Did it work for you?
really
I know
gorgeous.
Nathan kind of sent us a text the day before saying this could be a difficult one to be your introduction into Rivette, but did it work for you? Was it an okay introduction?
I didn't find it that difficult. I don't know if it's just because I was so engaged with all of the cool stuff that he was doing, or just the colors and the compositions. And I mentioned it to you, Nathan. It's like everything everybody wore was awesome. But I
had a feeling you would be into the fairy tale aspect of this, Lydia.
Yeah, hugely into the idea of like Queen of Night, Queen of Day sort of battling it out mythically. I loved it.
So for me, I'm going to kind of take a roundabout way of getting to my thoughts on Rivette, but he's only come on my radar very recently, and almost exclusively in the context of people talking about David Lynch, usually when they were talking about Twin Peaks: The Return, which I just finished for the second time just last week. And while I was watching Duelle, for at least the first half of it, I was thinking of a specific recurring scene in Twin Peaks: The Return, which is known as like the Roadhouse sequences, where you have these characters you've never met talking about other characters that you've never met, and like this just keeps happening throughout Twin Peaks: The Return. And in Duelle, you know, by the time you get to the end of the movie, I've kind of pieced together who all these people are and what their character relationships are and what the actual conflict is. But I don't know if this was the case for you, Lydia, but I was unclear on all that stuff until about the halfway point. I guess the moment of recognition would be in that lounge scene where a mirror breaks and all the lights turn off, and you know these two mythological queens have their little showdown, and it becomes very clear that something supernatural is going on. Before that, there was just this one offhand comment about mortals being easy to trick, but it was very unclear to me like whether or not these people were working together or they were competing with one another. And again, by the end, I had pieced the puzzle together more or less, but it would be interesting to go back and rewatch the first halves with the context of what I know now, because I was just kind of rolling with it for the first hour.
Yeah, I can't say I knew what was going on before then either. It was reminding me a whole lot of Antonioni's Blow Up. Just, I don't know, same sort of dreaminess and like vague sense of paranoia, I guess. I don't think Rivette's working the same sort of tradition at all, but like really mod fashion and then weird stuff is happening. Is it what's happening? I like it. And I don't need it to make sense right away, as long as it's visually engaging enough.
Nathan, as someone who's revisiting it, did you anything change on this second watch, or was it kind of the same as the first?
So as Andrew mentioned, I had a little bit of a crisis before watching this, because there have been a few times where there have been things that we've watched both in these series and in like our Jerry Lewis series, for example, where I have been a big voice in championing certain films or suggested titles based on things that I was really into. And I realized that either after doing it and seeing what the response was, or like halfway through doing it, realized that there was another movie that I maybe should have suggested that would have been a better starting point. Because I do feel like there are a lot of filmmakers who certain movies don't really make sense in some way. You know, I guess auteurism, that's what it is. So I was really unsure of which Rivette would be a good Rivette to start with. My first one was Le Pont du Nord from 1980, which has, I mean, it's not really quite so fantastical. It does have some fantastical elements to it, but it's much more of this, I talked about it with Dylan on, I guess, episode 150, I think that would have been. And, it's this movie with like maps and clues and, this very puzzle movie, but the puzzle is a lot of times, even though what's going on is very visually engaging, the puzzle is a lot of times sort of around you and in your head, and you don't really know where you're at. So, that's sort of a difficult sell sometimes. So I was unsure about this. And then rewatching this one, I think a lot of those fears were quelled. Because it is, Andrew, you said before the podcast that this is maybe like, at least from your understanding of Rivette, which from what I've seen of Rivette, I think I would agree with this, that this movie is a little more approaching high concept than what he often does. It takes a while to figure out where you are, or to not even fully figure out, but, have some sort of context. But it doesn't take the, like, multiple hours that it does in Out One. I think that I jokingly tweeted out and mentioned to some people while I was rewatching this that this is sort of like Jacques Rivette's Infinity War, which was just a joke about the magic stone in this movie and the search for the magic stone. But my good friend Adam Katzman mentioned to me, he was like, it is sort of like that actually, though, because it feels like characters from different franchises catching up with each other, and it's like, somehow it feels like in some way like 30 movies have come before this where you've explored these goddesses, these queen characters.
No character really gets an introduction per se. They're all just talking to each other as if we know everything we need to know about them.
And I think another comparison point that I hear a lot with Rivette, and I think is true from my limited experience with this writer, but along with Lynch, the comparison I hear a lot is Thomas Pynchon, which I think is definitely true. If you've seen Inherent Vice, or if you are at all familiar with his books, there's a sense where like there's this conspiracy going on, but unlike in other conspiracy thrillers, you don't get an outside view. You are in it. You are in the center of it. You just kind of woke up in the middle of this and you don't know exactly what's going on. You don't know what the names mean or where this is going, or even when it ends up somewhere, you're not still quite sure of where you are. Which is a difficult feeling. And so some of his movies I've struggled with more than others. But at the same time, for me, Finding Rivette was this sort of like galaxy brain moment of cinephilia, where it's like, just, at the same time super visually amazing and, doing all this crazy stuff with mirrors and perspective. But at the same time, a lot of what is really cool about it to me is what happens off screen and sort of what happens in your mind while you're watching it, while you're sort of trying to place puzzle pieces together that don't exactly add up.
And I think by the time you get to the end of the film, the puzzle that you have put together for yourself is a fairly simple one. It's the one that Zach and Lydia have both kind of summarized for us, the two queens fighting over the stone that's going to grant them life on Earth. I do have a question, though, just like on a very fundamental level of like what is going on and who the character motivations are, which is, the queens are going to kill these humans if they don't get the stone, or they're trying to kind of battle for the stone. The humans who wear the stone end up like in pain or dead.
I don't know. Wow.
So why do the humans not just give them the stone?
I guess, they're all just enchanted
because
by
humans
it, maybe.
suck.
I feel like that's a pretty basic thing.
I feel like the Pierre character, I don't know, he's doing some sort of mind thing with the goddesses, like trying to prove that he was as good as them or could meet them on equal footing, like he says at the end. And his sister didn't because they killed him dead, and so she was just mad about that.
My only guess is that it's like a Lord of the Rings thing where, like, when they hold on to the stone, it is bad for them, but they aren't really able to recognize that it's bad for them. They're just kind of so overcome with their enchantment of the stone that they can't register that. But I don't know.
It's like when you get one of those like toy rings from the grocery store and it turns your finger green, but it just looks really cool, so you keep wearing it anyways, and then your finger eventually falls off.
Just like
that's
that.
That's what it's
I hate it when that happens.
kind of like,
Another question that I have is that I feel like, in contrast to David Lynch's movies, where I spend so much time trying to figure it out, and then sometimes I do figure it out, and sometimes it's a puzzle that's not really solvable, like Inland Empire or something like that, I'm left with some sort of emotional catharsis or understanding of some larger ideas that David Lynch is trying to grapple with. And by the time I get to the end of Duelle, and I've done all the mental labor of putting the pieces together here, I don't feel like they necessarily point me in the direction of anything other than the puzzle itself, right? Am I wrong in thinking that this is just kind of plot for plot's sake?
Well, I will say this. That's one of the things I don't enjoy about watching Lynch movies. I do not find that fun at all, is grappling with the puzzle and then trying to put all the pieces together afterwards. But it was still emotionally satisfying, Duelle at least, for me, because I saw a lot of very cool things, and it was different than other movies that I've seen in a way that was like engaging and not super off-putting, like also David Lynch is sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, he's working with the grotesque in a way that Rivette is not.
I don't know. It's harder for me to say with this one than it is some of his other stuff, because he was we didn't really talk very much about his sort of origin as a member of Cahiers du Cinema and the French New Wave. And of those guys, I feel like he is one of the few who was sort of genuinely leftist and was editor of Cahiers du Cinema at a time when they were getting much more into looking at film through a sort of critical Marxist lens. So I feel like some of his earlier stuff, like Out One, to me, has a very political register where everyone is sort of wandering around looking for the center, looking for some kind of leader, looking for some kind of meaning in the wake of this great political uprising that then was either stomped out or fizzled out or didn't really turn into anything long-lasting. So these people are sort of wandering around in the aftermath of that, trying to grab onto each other. This movie, just because it's in this fantasy register, I don't know, harder for me to say, because there is not that political dimension waiting to be grabbed. Maybe it's, I mean, maybe it's pointing back to sort of like the fairy tale itself, or like the genre itself, as opposed to just plot. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask Lydia about the fairy tale element. I mean, you're obviously very fascinated by fairy tales and multiple retellings of the same one. This is doing its own thing. It's not necessarily like a Snow Queen or something like that. But what does, a very novel version of the kind of fairy tale narrative do for you on, you mentioned it's like emotionally satisfying. Like what is it that fascinates you and draws you to that kind of story?
I think it's just the use of very simple tropes or characters or archetypes. Like the idea of two queens is pretty basic, and night and dark, and then humans like wrestling with the immortal and not really doing a good job, obviously, but that still sort of seems like a fundamental building block of stories. I don't like talking about this too much because I know Jordan Peterson is like big on fairy tales and hierarchies and shit. In like a very annoying way.
Has he ruined fairy tales for you?
Trying his best. But let me think. I guess the best way to answer that as to why it's so emotionally satisfying is it's very simple narrative building blocks for me. And what I find fascinating is just the little weird shifts in detail and like what other people think to add on to these very rudimentary starting places. Whereas
with this, it seems like the main thing that's being shifted in this kind of narrative is the structure.
As in being plopped down in the middle of it? What?
Yeah, I guess so. And the whole game not really being... The rules of the game are not really outlined for you until the second half of the movie. Or maybe I'm just dumb and you guys didn't have that same experience.
No, I guess the thing about being plopped down in the middle of it is if you think of it as fairy tales and they just kind of... like they're all basically the same. So it's easier... not easier, but fun to just kind of pick up where it is, even if it's not the beginning, because the beginning and the end are always the same. Because it sounds like these two queens have been doing this forever, right? Like this is an ongoing 40 days, try to get control of the stone, and they don't at the end. Like they're defeated by the sister.
Yeah, and if we were to retroactively like imagine a grim fairy tale version of the Duelle myth that's being reinvented here, I would imagine that the protagonists of that story would be the two queens, and I don't think that's necessarily the case in Rivette films, right?
No. The protagonist would be the young human mortal.
Is that not what we get here? I mean...
That is, but sorry. I'm just thinking out loud.
Okay. Nathan, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I think that then maybe that points back to, like I was saying, like the genre, that fairy tales, have beginnings and endings and sort of prescribed directions. And so the fact that this scenario with these two queens keeps repeating itself over and over again is some, like, pointing back to the fairy tale form. But I also think he was just generally a very playful sort of creator. And also worth mentioning too, I feel like for context, is his sort of interest and background in experimental theater. I mean, the first 2 hours of Out One is these two experimental theater troupes who play an important role in the plot, doing warm-ups and breathing exercises. So I think the fact that sort of like a lot of the acting style here, and the sort of the repetition and the affectation, and even some of this stuff with there's a little bit of slapstick, here and there. But it's a sort of dull slapstick. Like at the beginning, the brother character does this pratfall. And so having this in this movie where a lot of times everyone is moving very slowly, I feel like is this sort of self-conscious, maybe, I don't know, Brechtian device or whatever you want to call it, or I don't know.
What?
So that's just my 2 cents.
I'm not sure if I totally understand Brechtian device, but something that really delighted me was the piano player with the
Yeah.
And it was like that was the only music that was in the film, and I loved it. I was just like, what's this guy doing?
Yes. Oh my gosh. How does it take us this long to get to the piano player? That was my anchor for the first half of this movie.
And it just keeps showing up in the background too. I don't know people.
We would have the camera just rotating to like show you a full 180 degrees of the room, and then by the end of the pan, you would see the piano player's head just in the background. Like, thank you. I was wondering where that music was coming from. And it adds a weird surreal element to sequences that really should be playing out in private spaces, like when we see the Queen of the Sun in. What's the male protagonist's name? Pierre. We see the Queen of the Sun in Pierre's like hotel room or something, and she's trying to seduce him, and the camera's just slowly whirling around the apartment, like making laps through the apartment, and you just keep seeing this dude who it just doesn't make any sense why he would be there.
I mean, it's where you get the idea of like when the music starts, you think, oh, it's put on top of the scene, diegetic, and it's like, nope, actually, there's a guy here. You're watching a movie.
Well, Lydia, you mentioned something very briefly that I thought was interesting, and we can maybe talk about more about the lack of music here. And I think in a lot of the Rivette movies I've seen, a lack of non-diegetic music, which I think puts us in this weird, uncomfortable space, just since we're so used to...
I think it's playful. Maybe.
Yeah.
Here it is. Maybe not.
You know, yeah, it's just like I feel like it changes our relationship to the characters and refocuses our attention.
Zach, what did you think of Duelle? You've been very silent.
I was afraid to say more French names. That was one. Can I make a point that will work its way into talking about Duelle that I was thinking about a lot today?
Absolutely.
I already did that, so that's fine.
So this is more something that I've noticed with people who watch movies, in that
no.
It's not a negative about the movie.
Okay.
It's more negative about people.
Oh no. I'm still worried.
They go into
Sure.
they go into movies with more of their own personal expectation rather than seeing the movie on their own level.
Okay, I agree with that.
That's something that I've really feel like I've developed I've become skillful at that over the past year when I'm watching movies that may be out of my quote-unquote comfort zone that I'm used to, that it's much easier to really see the movie as it is if you take yourself out of that space and watch the movie as it's clearly intended to be portrayed and seen. And that was something that I did especially earlier this year with Mulholland Drive, and I did again with Duelle, because it's definitely a very opaque movie, and Dog Star Man as well, because this movie is 100% not handing you anything really. It's bringing you into this very dreamy world that, you know, stuff flows together less with actual cutting, but it feels almost like there's this cloudy, pillowy cut between different scenes. They kind of go to different places. It's not necessarily a narrative A to B to C to D type situation, and it kind of disorients you a little bit, but I think it also plays to just the overall visual sense of cinema that you want to find in movies. Movies are supposed to kind of create a dreamlike state and take you into this world that is that can be unknown to you, and I think that Duelle does that so expertly that it's not holding your hand, it's just kind of dropping you into a pit, and you can either find something to hold on to, or you can just fall and be a complaining person. And and I mentioned off mic that I talked a little bit in the Cleo from 5 to 7 interview about how I watched it early in the morning, and it was very delightful. Duelle is not a good movie to watch early in the morning. I mean, I pumped myself with some coffee, and I worked really hard to focus, but just all of that different flowing from different story beats was a little disorienting at 8 o'clock in the morning after you woke up at 7:30. So I like the movie. I definitely want to revisit it and see more Rivette. But it didn't necessarily completely hold my attention, really hold me down as much as I probably would have liked to, and probably what was necessary. But at the same time, I actively tried to see it on its level, and I found really beautiful moments just out of that. I feel like for the second straight week, the dance sequence when you first meet the two characters in the like the dance club, whatever that club is that they go to often in the film, and they're just kind of they meet each other, and then they just start. Yeah, and they just start. And the two just start kind of dancing, less introducing why she's here, what's happening in the plot, but just kind of swaying to this very dreamy tune that the piano player is playing. I think those elements of the movie are really fascinating and engaging.
Wearing
but
that red thing.
That's just my overall point. It's just something that I've noticed recently that I think that should be more of a challenge to people who are watching movies. Try to see it on its level rather than going, well, this is what I expect out of it, because you're not going to get enrichment out of that.
No, I think that's a very good point to bring up, because I think
that's the end of my sermon.
Rivette especially is just one of those directors where you're like, I gotta put on my Rivette goggles now. I gotta look at this movie a little bit differently than I do a lot of the other things that I put into my eyes. And I think that after you have an experience with the filmmaker like that, it does change your relationship with all the other movies that you see a little bit, and lets you look for different things and find new things. And suddenly everything becomes this, to me at least, every movie becomes a little bit more of a game. Like, the more time I spend with Rivette, everything becomes a little bit more about duration and repetition and the sort of experience of myself in time. That is, like, I start to think about that more when I'm watching a Rivette movie, and then that goes, into my viewing of other films.
Nathan, aside from just thinking about Duelle as a part of Rivette's filmography as a whole, like if you just looked at this one movie, what is your takeaway from it? What is it about this movie that you feel like is, I don't know, thought-provoking or whatever? I'm just kind of at a loss. I feel like I've met Rivette on his level, and I feel like I'm wearing my Rivette goggles, and I'm able to deal with his form, but I'm not sure what I'm ultimately getting out of the experience.
I think maybe to go back to something that you brought up earlier, not to just compare movies to other movies, because we talked about the problems of that in part one. But there's, when I think about David Lynch, there is one, like on my top 5 or 10 like favorite things about David Lynch. Very close to that is a one specific cut in the beginning, towards the beginning of Inland Empire, where Laura Dern like starts to slowly turn her head around in horror to look at something like behind her that we can't see. And then it cuts and reveals that she's seen herself, and it just, that moment just totally, to me, like shatters the glass. If it's this just like essential cinema thing, this kind of alchemic property of montage that goes back to George Méliès, of this just sort of like the trick of editing to be able to make us almost in some way like look back at ourselves. And this stuff happens in this movie. And yes, in Rivette's other movies, but especially in this one, every time there's like a mirror or something, and I'm looking at people in a new way. Or towards the end in the subway when the Boulogier character is like taunting Pierre, and it keeps cutting back and forth, and he's just like stuck in this mirror looking at himself almost, you know. That is like the real pleasure of this movie. That just sort of stuff that makes me gasp a little bit, because it's, you know, it's so different from how my experience is in my day-to-day, and just creates this whole new way of seeing for me. That's what it's about. That's what this movie is sort of about. That sort of new way of seeing, and new way of experiencing time, and new way of experiencing narrative. I just like, ultimately, I think this goes back maybe to our conversation about Dog Star Man a few weeks ago. I like it when something like this that is a little, you know, more to the experimental side of things. I like it when it can show me something that I've never seen before, and show me something in a new way, or make me experience something just in a way that I don't fully understand, you know, in a way that where I don't even really know exactly how Rivette does what he does. There's this sort of magic there, and that's why it's fitting that it's a fairy tale, because it's about that magic of, like, I don't know, cinema or whatever, but that he can just do things, and I don't know. There is no solution. No matter how many movies I see, I don't know how he does this, how he writes it like that, how he cuts it like that, how he creates this narrative world. I don't know. It baffles me.
So it's just seeing somebody working in so much of their own mode is the thing that is satisfying about it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I could think that's the way of putting it.
I mean, it sounds kind of pretentious to say, but I understand exactly what you're saying. You go back to, especially the early days of movies, and even some of the short films that we watched at the very beginning of this series, and it's tough to disagree with the fact that you want these very surreal experiences with film. I think that you're gonna remember those moments that kind of make your jaw drop, that just feel like it's not even something that's instilled on a reel of film, or, you know, in a Blu-ray or DVD. It's just like this living spiritual moment that happens, and you watch something, and it just kind of takes you away. No, I 100% agree. But Lydia, you were going to say something?
Collaborating again on teasing out the surreal. Another film to do the film compare game, but like I was reminded very strongly of Donkey Skin.
Donkey Skin. You're going to have to explain that comparison.
Woo!
I mean, it's just the same, like, you kind of have this basic foundation of a fairy tale story, but like each person teases out these moments that are surreal or funny or just a little bit outside of where you think it's going. And also they're just both gorgeous to look at. Like, I don't know. It's just not on a narrative level at all. Just what I'm looking at on the screen.
Yeah, I think it's maybe, you know, we talk so many of the movies of the 60s and 70s, you know, we think of as like revisionist westerns or revisionist noir or revisionist musicals, and I think that this is sort of a revisionist fairy tale, like Donkey Skin, which I have not seen, but I really need to see.
I think you'd like it.
Yeah.
It's true, yeah.
Also, this is the only color movie we've done in a long time, and it's just like Technicolor. So,
exception of Dog Star Man, which had some nice like internal organs in color.
We had a very black and white Young Critics this year, at least so far.
I'm just so glad that you guys seem to mostly like this and seem at least willing, you know, maybe eager, I don't know, to watch more of that, because he's been super rewarding for me, and I am glad to pay it forward, as one Haley Joel Osment once said. I almost spoonerized his name, J. Lee Hole Osment. You know. Give the gift that keeps on giving, movies.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up? No? Okay.
Lydia?
Yeah, no, I think... I'll tell you, when I was doing research for the movie, there's nothing out there. I think we need more information about this guy. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, as we mentioned before, we will be talking about 1983's Risky Business, getting a little Tom Cruise dancing action. But I also wanted to direct you guys to the website. We have a lot of writing coming up this week that I think people should check out. Like I mentioned before, we have a review of Mission Impossible Fallout from Lydia Creech. We also had a very gift-centric review of the Mamma Mia franchise by Paige Taylor today. Definitely a visual treat for the eyes if you go check that out. We also, Andrew, help me with the other ones we'll have, because this will go up Friday. So what are the other ones we have?
Yeah, so Wednesday we would have published a review of Hillbilly, which played at the Scruffy City Film and Music Festival this week. A movie that people wouldn't have a chance to see yet, but maybe soon. And then Thursday, Nathan may be publishing on Unfriended Dark Web. Is that still happening?
That's gonna happen.
All right. We'll know for sure when this comes out on Friday if that actually happened.
It'll happen. It will happen.
There's no guarantees.
There is a guarantee. I'm signing a blood pact.
Well, that will wrap up this. Oh, what am I doing? I'm like,
you're the one who closes the show.
I'm gonna be in a loop. Oh, thanks guys for listening. We'll see you next week.